The views, opinions, and statements expressed by our guests are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Dr. Jason Littleton or the Concierge Doc podcast. We do not endorse or take responsibility for any statements, claims, or perspectives shared in this content. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own research and form their own conclusions.
Access to the information and materials contained in this podcast is at your own risk. The information contained is presented for the purpose of educating the consumer on a variety of wellness and healthcare topics. Nothing contained is intended to be instructional for medical diagnosis or treatment. The information contained is compiled from a variety of sources. The information should not be considered complete and exhaustive and should not be in place of a visit or consultation with your own primary care doctor. Welcome to the Concierge Doc podcast. I'm your host, CEO and founder of Littleton Concierge Medicine, Dr. Jason Littleton. Now, today's guest, very excited to have on. She's triple major in physics, biological systems engineering, and clinical neuroscience. She got her undergraduate degree at Virginia Tech in 2018. Graduate degree, she's a PhD in translational biology, medicine, and health at Virginia Tech in 2022. She did the dissertation on C-gas sting, signaling in traumatic brain injury, mitochondrial DNA-induced antiviral signaling in a mouse model of TBI. She also started as Director of Scientific Communications at New Amsterdam Genomics in 2022, and in her free time, she loves horses, professional equestrian, horseback riding instructor, and horse trainer. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Lauren Fritsch. Thank you. Welcome to the Concierge Doc podcast. Thank you for being on with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. I think what you do is so fascinating, and I want you to talk to us about your role as Director of Scientific Communication at New Amsterdam Genomics.
Yeah, so I took the role in 2022, right after finishing up my PhD. And what I was really hoping for was a career that allowed me to, first off, of course, be still working in science, but to really help healthcare transform. So we really had this, very reactive type of healthcare system, and I was hoping to help with that, preventative healthcare change. So in this role, it's been absolutely awesome. I get to research genetic studies, read about different diseases, as well as interact with clinicians like yourself and patients to help explain genetic testing results and really help to, integrate clinical genomics into healthcare.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, with New Amsterdam Genomics, you have this test that physicians can administer to their patients and learn about, their genes and how we can help them in terms of some of the genetic, hereditary diseases they may or may not have. Speak to us about that. How can myself as a physician help my patients by using this test?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to really help people understand that is to first off explain a little bit about the different types of genetic testing that are available. So a lot of people have heard about these more, kind of direct-to-consumer tests like 23andMe, Ancestry.com. And what those tests are doing is looking for something called a single nucleotide polymorphism, a SNP. And they tend to have picked out very common things. So if you think about something like ancestry or physical traits, those are going to be very common mutations in the DNA. So what a lot of those companies do is they've picked out these common things, and then they're giving you common information. So if you're interested in, finding your long lost cousin, that is fantastic. That's a really good way to do that. But for healthcare, that doesn't necessarily get you the information that you need. So when we're talking about disease, the assumption here is most of these things are not going to be very common mutations. If it was super common, we would expect everyone to have the same health issues. So what New Amsterdam Genomics does is a type of testing called whole exome sequencing. We also do whole genome sequencing. And what this is sequencing all 22,000 genes in the genome, to look for different mutations that may relate to disease risk.
Wow.
So rather than really focusing on the common things, we've got all the common things, all the rare things, and everything in between. So lots of information. For you as the clinician, what do you actually do with that? If we gave you this giant data file, that really wouldn't help you all that much. So the really cool thing about this technology is we have a proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm that is comparing every single mutation in an individual's DNA to the entirety of the medical literature. So those common things we can certainly pick up, but if there is even a case study about one patient with a mutation that you have, we can find that and explain what it means for you.
Wow. Wow, that's huge.
It's super, super cool. So for you as the clinician, this is really giving you the best of the best genetic information available for each of your patients without needing to just look at the common things. You get, all of those super rare mutations, and that's going to then help you understand what your patients are at risk for, as well as what they can do about it. So it's really designed to be empowering for patients and clinicians.
So when a person signs up with New Amsterdam Genomics, is it kind of a one-time consultation, or do you help that patient throughout their lifetime?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So it's a one-time test. So what that means is your DNA is not changing over the course of your lifetime. And it's just a saliva sample, so it's very easy to collect. You do that once, and then we have all of your genomic sequence available. Now, what can change, of course, is the science on the interpretation of what those different mutations mean. So what our algorithm actually does is every couple of weeks, it rescans every single patient's genome and all of the available medical literature to look for new relationships that might exist. When those relationships are found, we send you as the clinician as well as the patient an email that tells them to sign into their web portal and look at that new information. So a one-time test that follows you for life and updates as that science evolves.
But with, your company, is a patient able to talk to someone throughout this journey, throughout their life journey? Or is it, how does that work? How do they interact if they have further questions that, they may have about new information that comes in?
Yeah, so the primary point of contact for each patient is their clinician. Okay. You, of course, are familiar with the patient's labs, medical history, all of that good stuff. You're going to be able to help put each of those findings in context for a patient. The flip side to that, though, is sometimes people still have more questions about, what is the science of this? How do I interpret it?
Right.
In that case, patients are always welcome to reach out to us either directly or through their provider and get questions answered about, I've read this study. I don't quite understand, what does this actually mean for me? How much science is really backing this? That type of thing. We really pride ourselves on helping patients and clinicians understand the results. They're only helpful if you know how to use them. So we encourage people, if they come to you with a question about something in their DNA and the two of you are like, yep, not quite sure, you are always more than welcome to reach out to us to get more clarity on things.
So a person could have, let's say multiple issues that light up in their genomic studies, but yet they're not experiencing them physically. But they're concerned and they're worried, and how do you work with people that may get concerned about something that it's showing up in their genes, they don't presently show signs of it, and they may never? What is your advice to that person? Because some people will take the information and get really worried, but then some people will be reassured, and some people will get the information and be like, okay, look, I know what to look out for and how to change things in my environment. What do you say to that those different examples?
Yeah, so the big thing is genetics is not destiny. Just because something is in your DNA.
That's really good. That's key.
Yeah. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's guaranteed to affect you. People oftentimes hear genetics and they think, well, if it's in your DNA, that's your biology. There's nothing you can do about that.
Let me just re-say that. Genetics is not destiny. That was so key. I think people have to swallow that and really let that soak in. Go ahead.
Yeah. So a lot of times people think, yeah, it's in my DNA, so there's nothing I can do. I'm just stuck with that. It's certainly going to affect me. And it's true there are a handful of diseases that are purely genetic. So, it's not that that's impossible. But for the typical diseases that our patients are coming to us that they're concerned about, it's not the case. If you think about something like heart disease,
Right.
really common problem, right? Everybody is going to have a genetic risk of some sort for some type of heart disease. There's no way you will not. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to affect you, because let's say you have that risk and you eat well, you exercise frequently, you get good sleep, you're doing all the right things. It is completely possible that you will never have heart disease. And that's kind of the hope, is by understanding what you're at risk for. First of all, it's kind of motivating for people. If you're at risk for diabetes based on your DNA and you're trying to cut out sugar from your diet, at least for me, that's kind of a motivator to say, yeah, this is really going to be important, because if I don't do this, here's what might happen. But on top of that, what you're at risk for. It gives you this much more manageable list of things to worry about, rather than saying, well, I could be affected by any of 10,000 diseases. Our company is able to say to people, these are the, maybe 6 to 8 conditions to be most focused on. Doesn't mean you'll have those, but it gives you an idea to work with your healthcare provider and say, what changes can I make to really proactively reduce the risk of these things? So genetics aren't destiny. Just because it's there doesn't mean that it's actually going to affect you. It's just helping you learn what you need to do to prevent it.
Wow, you explained that awesome. That was I love that. Genetics is not destiny. So when it comes to like cancer health and cancer risk, obviously it sounds like New Amsterdam Genomics covers that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And cancer is a kind of a tricky area, because that's one where there's many factors involved in cancer development. It's not purely genetic. We don't necessarily know what every single one of those factors are, but we know some things that are not so helpful. So what you end up looking at for that is, if you have a genetic risk for cancer, oftentimes it tells you what things in the environment are really key to avoid. So let's say you have a genetic risk for lung cancer, and this is, presumably you are not a smoker, you've never really been around a lot of cigarette smoke. What we can actually do is look at what that gene does and understand what about the way that this protein is being affected increases cancer risk. So let's say it's related to the breakdown of chemicals that you would typically find in cigarette smoke. The next kind of step to that is to say, well, we're not really worried about the lung cancer in a non-smoker so much, but we know that you maybe live in a busy city where you're frequently around a lot of airborne pollutants and things like that. Then you can kind of talk about, well, what are the things that we can do about, the air quality, the exposure to chemicals, things like that maybe your body's not breaking down as well. So kind of a tangent there, but I think that's an important point, because oftentimes people think about, well, if I have a predisposition to cancer, there's nothing I can do. And that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes we have changes to screening protocols, changes to, your environmental exposures, things like that can be really helpful.
No, that's really good. You explained that very well. More and more in practice, I'm seeing people who are not smokers that are developing lung cancer. And, they say, well, I've never smoked in my life. Can this test also, I'm assuming it can help, tip a physician off about that early, or is there more to it, more that we need to do to discover and to highlight these patients before this type of concern comes up?
Yeah, so the genetic information is super powerful. It is, of course, not the only information. It would be like, trying to treat heart disease by just looking at someone's genetics. We've got so many other tools available. You have to use a combination. Cancer is one of those areas where many cancers do not start because of a genetic predisposition. There's something in the environment that tends to trigger it.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit tricky, because not having a genetic variant that predisposes to cancer doesn't mean you won't develop cancer. The flip side of that, though, is if you have that genetic variant that predisposes to cancer, the likelihood of it typically is much higher.
Yeah.
So then as a clinician, you can talk about, the early cancer detection tests and things like that for a patient that has a genetic risk, that's really going to be a focus. Whereas a patient without a genetic risk for cancer, you don't really have quite as much information about, the types of cancer to look out for, things to avoid, that kind of thing.
Does doing this test eliminate certain gene testing as it comes to expectant mothers? How
Yes,
does that apply?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we offer really in-depth carrier status testing.
Okay.
So if you were to go to a fertility specialist, typically they'd be looking at, things like cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs, those more common, well-known recessive conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Our testing, of course, looks for those things, but we can also look for very, very rare mutations that most of these other tests wouldn't even consider because, again, they're very rare. The vast majority of your patients are not going to have them, so we don't really get as much benefit from it. So for our testing, we can actually compare two expectant parents' DNA to see if there's anything in common that they should be worried about at all. So much, much more in depth than the typical carrier status testing that you would do.
Wow. So taking this test, and it's going to encompass that right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's awesome.
Yep.
That's amazing. Now, when it comes to, applying it and physicians giving it to their patient census, is it something that you recommend providers do right off the bat when they have a new patient, tell them about this opportunity? Or is it something that when something comes up along the way that they introduce it? When's the best time for doctors to introduce this to their patients?
It depends a little bit on the type of practice. I mean, I, of course, think that everybody should get this type of testing as early in life as possible so that you know what you're looking out for. I would say the best time to do this for, a provider is ideally when you have a new patient coming in, because that's really giving you kind of a blueprint of things to look out for. It might inform other tests that you may need to do. It might tell you, maybe we're going to do an initial check for this, but if we don't see any areas of concern, we revisit it annually or, something like that. Maybe we don't need to prioritize it. The other component, though, is if you have some existing health condition, the genetic information can do kind of two different things for you. So first, there's a huge psychological component to it that I think is often missed. Let's say you have a patient who has been struggling with their weight their whole life. It's been really powerful for people to understand that they have a genetic predisposition to that weight gain, because it makes them feel so much better knowing I didn't do something wrong. It's not that I'm not trying, I'm not putting in the effort. It's that I'm really fighting against my biology on this.
Wow.
So
Wow.
Yeah, and it's something I don't think people tend to think about. You typically think about, well, yeah, I already knew that. That's not all that interesting. But understanding that you didn't do anything wrong, it's in your DNA, it means you're going to have to work a little harder. Maybe you're going to need, more intensive interventions to help combat that.
Wow. That was huge I never thought about that. So it's not just what a person's eating, because this applies to that person who's exercising. They say they're eating right, they're doing all the right things, and yet they're still fighting an uphill battle regarding their weight. That's huge what you just said. So what can you tell us specifically what gene or what are you finding when it comes to weight loss and it pertains to genomics?
So there's of course many genes related to weight gain, weight loss, that kind of thing. There's a few in some of the hunger hormones. So this is something that a lot of patients have been asking about, especially with the GLP-1 based medications and things like that. It's, people are really understanding this a little better. So there's one particular one in a gene called ghrelin. It's a hunger hormone. It stimulates appetite. And this is a pretty common mutation, and it basically causes you to just feel hungry, even if you've eaten. So oftentimes patients that have this mutation will describe it as, they eat dinner with their family and then, an hour later they're going back to the pantry because they just still feel hungry. They don't really feel satiated. So with things like that, first off, it's explaining why are you getting back up to go to the pantry when, the rest of your family is sitting down enjoying family time.
You just sold the product right there, because now if people hear this part, and they will, they're going to want to buy and take the test. I mean, that sells the product right there. Most physicians don't know that. I also know most people don't know that. that they could have a genetic predisposition and they can find out what it is to help with. You just made money right there. That's amazing. Oh my God. I don't mean to stop you, but I gotta just acknowledge that for a second. That needs to be like on repeat. You just play that, you'll make money. In terms of selling the test, because so many people struggle with that. The weight loss industry is massive in terms of pharmaceuticals, in terms of fitness and nutrition, health. Wow. That was an aha moment for me, so I had to stop you, but continue, please.
Yeah. So first off, you get, that psychological kind of boost of saying, yep, I'm not crazy, it's here. And just acknowledging that is so, so powerful for so many people. Then the next component is, well, what do we do about it now? This is describing what I've been going through my whole life. Now what? So then we can start digging into the underlying biology of what's actually happening with that type of mutation. So in that, ghrelin example, this is something that stimulates appetite. It's making you, feel hungry when you're not. And if we look at things that help reduce the production of that hunger hormone, those are all of your solutions now for helping that patient to lose weight. So just as an example for this particular one, fiber consumption specifically helps to downregulate or reduce the amount of ghrelin that your body produces. So a lot of people will hear, fiber makes you feel full longer. They'll have that in the back of their mind, but they won't really think about how that applies to them. Well, if your body is making too much of that hunger hormone, then fiber is going to be a huge thing for you to help kind of blunt that appetite increase.
Wow. What about applications to insomnia, people who have trouble with sleep?
Yeah, so sleep is kind of a tricky one. The genetics for sleep is pretty new. What we see more often than not for people with sleep concerns is mutations in genes related to the circadian rhythm that cause kind of a shift in basically your, when you feel tired. So if you think about someone that is perpetually a night owl, doesn't matter what they do, they want to be up late. And now you put that individual into a career where maybe they need to be up early every day and they just don't feel good about it. Sometimes we'll find that they actually have a genetic variant that quite literally has their circadian rhythm shifted to make them that night owl. So that doesn't necessarily, solve insomnia. Insomnia is a pretty tricky thing to, tackle just with genetics, of course. But again, you first off can sometimes get that psychological component of saying, oh, okay, it's not me being lazy in the morning. It's that my biology dictates that I should go to bed a little bit later than the typical person. But if you know something like that, you can be a little bit more systematic with helping to kind of shift that circadian rhythm. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to tell you, you need to meditate before bed or, something like that. We've got a lot of great literature about things to do to improve sleep. But in the case of someone that, is kind of stuck on a sleep schedule that's not necessarily compatible with their lifestyle, we do frequently see that there's, helpful information at a genetic level for that.
Wow, that's amazing. And this is just a shot in the dark, but I wanted to ask what about pain? Is there are there genes that give people a predisposition in terms of having chronic pain?
So that is a great question. So pain and fatigue-based syndromes, because they tend not always go hand in hand, but they can. They're kind of anomalies in the field of biology because we really don't have a clear idea of what causes a lot of these things. There are a few markers for pain sensitivity. They tend to be studied in the context of people that don't experience pain, or they have a very dulled sense of pain. Those I've seen, kind of pop up in patients. There's not, unfortunately, a ton related to chronic pain syndromes and things like that. What I will say, though, we didn't touch on pharmacogenomics, but I think that's an important thing for your listeners to be aware of. One of the really cool things with genetics is we can actually figure out which medications are more likely to work for you based on your DNA. So New Amsterdam Genomics, of course, offers a complete pharmacogenomics analysis. So when you're talking about things like pain management, one of the things that we are able to offer is you as the clinician can plug in a certain medication to basically see if there's any red flags for, maybe the patient doesn't break that medication down very well. Maybe they break it down super rapidly, and so giving the standard dose isn't going to do anything because their body's just metabolizing it so quickly. So we can't necessarily explain why someone might be experiencing pain, but if nothing else, we can at least help you, to help your patients by choosing a more appropriate medication, understanding, something about the biology as much as possible.
Okay, well said. So it sounds like there's a portal that people can interact with that, let's say as it pertains to mental health, and they want to find out what type of SSRI that they should be taking that's going to help with their mood or their anxiety. New Amsterdam Genomics is going to be able to help with that, correct?
Yeah. So we have, it's a view on the web portal that our providers are able to access. Our patients are not, just because we want to make sure that it's going to the right people. But you as a clinician could go through all of the SSRIs, for example, and look for a patient to see, is there one of these that is more likely to be beneficial than another? Now, just like everything else, of course, it's multifactorial. We have a good understanding of genetics right now, but that's always evolving. So just because somebody doesn't have a red flag for something doesn't mean it's going to be perfect for them or, anything like that. But it does take a lot of the guesswork out. So you can immediately cross some things off your list when you're trying to prescribe a new medication for a patient by saying, yeah, you don't break this one down very well. We're not using this because maybe it'll work well, but you're going to have side effects from it, and we don't want to do that. So it can help you take this massive list of possible medications and really narrow it down so that you're not just, playing a guessing game and working through 10 or 15 different meds.
Wow. That's going to be extremely helpful. I can see all the myriad of applications, ramifications of getting your genes tested and getting them, and having your primary care doctor understand what's on your plate, what you're dealing with. That makes so much sense. Now, I want to ask you, before we close out, how do you, I have this MEDS acronym: move, eat, drink, sleep. I ask everyone on the podcast about that. And I want to ask you this in the backdrop of what we're talking about today. Like, you've probably taken the test yourself, I'm assuming. And how has that changed how do you move, eat, drink, sleep? And what tips can you give us in regards to your own health?
Yeah, so I guess I'll kind of touch on the genetic part of it first, because that really underlines a lot of these. So for me, I have a strong maternal family history of breast cancer and a strong paternal family history of heart disease. Now, the family members with heart disease tend to not be the healthiest livers. They, don't exercise well, they don't eat well. So for me, I kind of assumed that was probably more lifestyle based rather than genetic. My genetics came back showing I didn't have that crazy high risk for breast cancer that I thought I had, so that was fantastic for me. But I do have quite a few markers for high cholesterol, heart disease, things like that. So that was something I'd never thought that was going to be a concern for me. So with that, I had my doctor do some more advanced lipid tests. We kind of started digging around to see, actually, some of these things are not really in the range that I want. And so that's really changed a bit on the diet side of things, because I'm very physically active. There's only so much movement you can do in a day. So that I couldn't really do much with. But what I could do was think about, well, I know that my cholesterol's up a little bit. I know I have some of these more inflammatory molecules. I'm going to make some tweaks to my diet to address that. And that's not something I would have thought to do had I not done the genetic testing first.
Wow.
So kind of the backdrop to that. But then in terms of, what do I do specifically? So for the movement, you mentioned at the beginning that I'm a horse trainer and horseback riding instructor. So I am super fortunate in that I get to work from home for this job. So we have a gym set up in the basement. I do resistance training. I have a treadmill at my desk. So I do a lot of walking between meetings, that kind of thing. Just getting, sustained movement in throughout the day. And then I'm riding my horses every evening. So that's, I'm always moving in the evenings and weekends and, so I'm on my feet all the time. Movement's not something I really have to think about all that hard because I'm constantly moving.
Wow. Now tell us about your diet. How do you eat?
Yeah, so I have a sweet tooth. That is my big downfall.
Did you find that out from the testing, or you knew that?
No, I didn't. That one I didn't know. So for me, I can eat the world's healthiest dinner and I still need something sweet after dinner. Like I have to have it. So for me, the biggest thing is there's a balance to everything. So I try to incorporate as many, fruits, veggies, plants, things like that into my diet as possible. But I also know that I'm not a very happy person if I don't have any sugar.
Right.
So my coffee creamer has sugar in it. I'm not giving it up. I can give up sugar in other places, but that's my thing, that the psychological wellness of it is so important for me that I can focus on other parts of my diet. And, I keep my coffee creamer and I keep my occasional dessert.
But did you find out that you might have had a predisposition to sugar?
There's not a ton in my DNA. Honestly, I haven't done all that much digging because I don't think I want it to tell me that I like sugar more than the typical person. That's going to make me feel justified in it.
No, I get that. Sometimes, there's got to be a way to block from what you don't want to see when you get your genes,
Yeah, you actually
sequence.
can choose to not show, like if you didn't want to know about your risk for Alzheimer's disease, patients can check that off on their consent form and they don't have to see it. We typically don't think about, like sugar consumption as being a scary thing for people. So there's not an option for that. But
well, as it pertains to diabetes and people who acquire type 2 diabetes later in life, I'm sure that there's got to be some interesting applications there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely some for, the way that your body kind of processes that sugar that can predispose to diabetes. Fortunately, I don't have any of those, which does at least make me feel okay about, having that sugar.
Good.
Because I know that I'm not in that pre-diabetic state. I've, kind of checked blood sugars and things like that. And the choices I'm making in my diet right now seem to be working really well for my metabolic health. So.
Got it. Good. What about hydration? How do you drink? Move, eat, drink, sleep.
Yeah, so I drink water throughout the day. I always keep a water bottle near me at all times, constantly, because if I don't, I will forget to drink. I don't really like flavored water. I don't like carbonation, so it's honestly pretty easy for me to focus on just drinking pure water throughout the day. When I'm really physically active, especially in the warmer months, I like coconut water based like hydration drinks and, for the electrolytes and things like that. So I don't tend to like I know you can get some really fantastic like electrolyte packets and things like that. Those don't work as well for me. That more coconut water based approach seems to work better for hydration for me.
Wow, interesting. Talk to us about sleep. We talked a little bit about sleep in general, but what are your sleep tips?
Yeah, so sleep is something that I think is really lacking in our healthcare system right now. We don't really talk about it. And I'm, of course, a neuroscientist by training, and sleep is so critical for your cognitive health. On top of that hunger hormone I mentioned, poor sleep actually upregulates that. So if you're someone that, you didn't get a good night's sleep and then you feel really hungry the next day, there is biology for that. But for me, I'm someone that I need closer to 9 hours of sleep a night. I wish I could work well.
Me too. I need about 9 or 10.
Yeah, I'm not a happy person if I don't get a minimum of 8 hours of sleep every night. And that was something that was actually a really hard thing for me to figure out because I was getting, 7 to 8 hours and was still feeling kind of sluggish throughout the day. So I think part of it for me was just recognizing that more than 8 hours of sleep can be very normal too. We've kind of normalized, running on very little sleep. And that was a hard mental shift for me, especially after doing all of my academic studies. So yeah, for me, I'm not always phenomenal about going to bed and getting up at the same time, but I always make sure I get at minimum 8 hours of sleep, usually closer to 9.
Wow, that's good. So you wake up, at the same time, you go to bed at the same time, or how are you so consistent?
Yeah, it's mostly I think ahead a little bit. So like if I know I need to be up early the next day, I'm going to bed a little bit earlier. And for me, I'm super fortunate. I don't really have a hard time falling asleep and staying asleep. So it doesn't really make a huge difference. If I shift my bedtime by an hour night to night, I don't tend to find that has that big of an effect for me. There's other people where that is certainly not the case. But for me, it works. If I know I need to be up early, I go to bed early. If I know I can sleep in, I might stay up late and, read a book longer or something like that.
Can our genes tell us anything about how some people are morning people and some people are not? Like, I don't like waking up early in the morning.
Yeah, there's actually a few. They pop up we have a page on the web portal called the Diet, Exercise, and Lifestyle page. And there's actually a few kind of wellness traits in there. Some of those are related to, are you more likely to be, a night owl? Are you more likely to get up early? That kind of thing. There's actually some genetic studies for that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to take the test myself because I want to just find out what it says on that. I like rolling into the day, I mean, I don't know, maybe I go to bed too late, but so what about success? Can our genes tell us anything about how successful a person would be, or maybe not?
Not really. Success is up to you. You can do anything that you put your mind to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of those things where even if there were some genetic markers for it, I don't think we want them.
Yeah.
I think you should feel like you can tackle anything that you want to. So your genes are certainly not limiting how successful you can be. You can do anything you want.
That's good to know. Before we wrap up, I got to ask you this question. If you were giving an elevator pitch in 30 seconds about why people should get their genes tested, why people should have this done, how would you do it? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, you really are, man. Okay, so I think the biggest thing that you get from this is kind of what I talked about. You get the peace of mind knowing what is and isn't there. So you know why you're experiencing the things that you're experiencing, and you're not going to have certain diseases you were worried about. The second part, the other 15 seconds, is you get to know what to be proactive about. So nobody wants to be unhealthy. Everybody wants to live live a long time and live healthy. And it's kind of like cheating. You know what you're already worried about, so you can do the right things now and, stay healthy as long as possible.
I love it. Get your genes tested so you can cheat on your health and live longer.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I'm just joking, but I mean, I love that. That's amazing. I'm so glad that I had you on. Where can people find more information about you, Amsterdam Genomics?
Yeah, they can look us up online. Our website is nagenomics.com. There's a contact button on there. And I will mention for people, because I imagine you've got a lot of patients listening, our testing has to go through a doctor. So if you are a patient that's interested in doing the testing and you don't have a doctor that's familiar with us, first of all, we'd love to meet your doctor and explain how everything works so that they can help all of their patients. But people can always reach out to us on the website and let us know, where they're located, that kind of thing. And if we've got a healthcare provider in that area that we know is, comfortable using our testing and taking new patients, we will always refer out.
Oh, this is awesome. I'm so glad that I had you on. This is something that we're going to offer at Littleton Concierge Medicine. It's something that I really believe in. And, I had a discussion with you earlier in the week that I was like, I got to have you on the podcast. This is what people need to hear. I don't think that people really know about this. And then you said some things today about weight loss that I just feel like, my gosh, this is going to fly off the shelves in my office because everyone's going to want to come in and get tested now and just find out if they have a predisposition to weight gain or have difficulty losing weight. I mean, this is awesome. Thank you for coming on. Listen, this is Dr. Lauren Fritsch, and you've just been wonderful to have on. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you again. I got to have you back on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. Well, listen, you guys, you're going to want to download this podcast and listen to it over and over again. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Concierge Doc Podcast. I'm glad again to have you on. This has been awesome. Can't wait to talk to you guys next week. Thank you.